Canadian people did not vote for fringe voices like the Bloc Quebecois.
Premier Danielle Smith immediately sets the tone with her powerful statement that Canadian people did not vote for fringe voices like the Bloc Quebecois. This opening clip perfectly establishes the theme of the entire video. Smith's unapologetic stance against what she sees as extreme voices gaining disproportionate influence in Canadian politics. The host, David, frames this perfectly by noting that something's brewing and that Smith has had enough and ain't playing. What's particularly compelling here is how Smith is positioning herself as a defender of mainstream Canadian values against fringe elements. The mention of Mark Carney and his net zero agenda contextualizes the brewing confrontation between Alberta's interests and what the host sees as harmful climate policy. When the host says this is going to explode here soon, he's highlighting the growing tension between Alberta's resource-based economy and the federal government's environmental policy.
There, please.
Mr. Carney, what comes next in the trade war with the U.S.?
Hold there, guys.
Will you be negotiating with Donald Trump, Mr. Carney? Our elbows down now, sir.
Okay, that's right here, sir.
No problem. Mark Carney getting in. Newly elected Prime Minister.
In this powerful segment, I need to tell you that all of the Western premiers who have a large canola industry in their provinces, regardless of political stripe, have raised it directly with the Prime Minister. This is a crucial moment as it shows Smith building a cross-partisan Western coalition against policies that harm Canada's agricultural heartland. Her characterization of the situation as a phony war is particularly devastating. She exposes how the federal government has implemented a 100% tax on EV vehicles from China that no one's buying, supposedly to protect an EV industry in Ontario that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Western provinces are being punished with tariffs on pork and canola, which are products people do want. This brilliantly illustrates how central Canadian interests are being protected at Western Canada's expense.
Sheila Gunn-Reid with Rebel News. Premier, canola is a $44 billion industry. It supports 206,000 jobs, 40,000 Western farmers. Yet Prime Minister Carney, during his campaign and even now, has said nothing about the 100% retaliatory Chinese tariffs on canola thanks to the Liberals' green protectionist EV policies. So what is your government doing to ensure the canola tariffs are treated with the same urgency by the Fed as the auto and steel sector one?
Well, I can tell you that all of the Western premiers who have a large canola industry in their provinces, and that is regardless of political stripe, have raised it directly with the Prime Minister. It seems like it's a bit of a phony war. We've got a 100% tax on EV vehicles from China that no one's buying in order to protect an EV industry in Ontario that doesn't exist. And in return, we are seeing punishment on pork and canola in our Western provinces, which are products people do want. So I think the Chinese have been very targeted and direct in how they're trying to split our country up. And I think we need to revisit that. We obviously are going to have to find new markets for our products, but let's at least engage in proportionate responses rather than having a knee-jerk reaction that is only going to hurt our industries further. And that has been conveyed by myself as well as other premiers directly to the Prime Minister.
Mark Carney doesn't care because he's business partners with Xi Jinping. So that's why he's not even mentioned it once. Not once. And he's asked about his ties to China and the JCCC. He fumbled and bumbled over that answer. He's like, I don't know why they would mention me. And the JCC one with the Globe and Mail, he said, oh, you shouldn't trust everything in the Globe and Mail. Got all pissy about it, even though it's proven that he's been hanging out with those guys. He's had meetings with those guys. So it's quite clear Mark Carney's compromised. Canadians voted in a compromised prime minister. That's why there's been no mention of China and their tariffs whatsoever.
The Bloc leader, who will hold some power and influence over Carney's minority cabinet, has just said that there is no future for oil and gas in Quebec or anywhere for that matter. Carney has also said he would allow a Quebec veto over pipelines. So how does Alberta then respond if no pipelines east is the deal that helps Carney keep his government from falling?
Well, I would hope that's not the case. The Canadian people did not vote for fringe voices like the Bloc Quebecois or fringe voices like the Green Party or fringe voices like the NDP to control the agenda for the next while here. What Albertans and Canadians voted for was for Canada to become an economic superpower.
This is amazing. She just blasted all three of them in one go.
And that means also an energy superpower. And that is what I would fully expect Mark Carney to do. I hope that he's able to continue forward with an agenda that perhaps even the conservative opposition would support him in. That's what I think the message of the election is. And I would surely hope that he's not listening to fringe voices from a party that is solely committed to breaking this country up.
This is perhaps the most powerful clip of Smith directly demolishing the legitimacy of three opposition parties in one masterful statement, when she declares Canadian people did not vote for fringe voices like the Bloc Quebecois or fringe voices like the Green Party or fringe voices like the NDP to control the agenda. She's delivering a devastating blow to these parties' claims to power in the minority government arrangement. They brilliantly reframes the election results by stating what Albertans and Canadians voted for was for Canada to become an economic superpower. This is political judo at its finest, taking the election's ambiguous outcome and asserting a mandate for economic growth and energy development. By adding that means also an energy superpower, she's directly challenging the anti-oil stance of the parties she just dismissed as fringe.
Of Premier Smith, there's legislation, for example, that's being introduced this week that essentially lowers the bar for when a referendum can be held. She was asked during a press conference today on multiple occasions, is this about separatism? She indicated that polling shows there isn't wide support, but she wouldn't want to prescribe what it be used for. So I think the interpretation is she's not saying no way, no how. Premier Moe in Saskatchewan also said today, I'm a Canadian. I was reading, I believe the Canadian Press reported, but that he would not stand in the way of a vote to separate. I'm in no way discounting feelings of alienation, but does Nathan have a point in that, taking it to that step and not ruling it out as the leaders of those provinces is also irresponsible in the way they are accusing the previous government of being irresponsible on national unity?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, this alienation is a real feeling that Albertans feel. They're tired of being disrespected in Canada. It's not necessarily just about moving oil to the coast or getting natural gas to the coast. It's about respect. Alberta makes a major contribution to Confederation. And what do they get for that? They get ignored by the Liberal government for the last 10 years. They get Jonathan Wilkinson, Stephen Guilbeault running down the industry, finding ways to keep oil and gas in the ground as much as they possibly can. And then all of a sudden there's sort of bemusement at the idea that people would feel alienated and that they would not be satisfied with Alberta's place in Confederation. I think Premier Smith is doing the right thing. She's essentially providing a bit of a relief valve.
This host continues her masterful takedown by expressing hope that Mark Carney will continue forward with an agenda that perhaps even the conservative opposition would support him in. This is brilliant political framing. She's setting up parameters for what constitutes legitimate governance while marginalizing the influence of those she considers fringe voices. The knockout blow comes when she states, I would surely hope that he's not listening to fringe voices from a party that is solely committed to breaking this country up. This direct attack on the Bloc Quebecois is devastating because it questions not just their policies, but their fundamental legitimacy as a party that should have any influence in governing Canada. By emphasizing their separatist agenda, she effectively portrays them as anti-Canadian actors who shouldn't be anywhere near the levers of power.
It's great that they have support for this, or to go back to what they're doing and find another way to show their dismay. But this is a good way, in my mind, for people to say that we're upset about Alberta's place in Confederation, but it's not going to go, frankly, I don't think it'll go anywhere.
You just don't hear it from BC. We have lots of Western alienation as well, and we don't clamor every opportunity from our political leaders. I don't think there's a sentiment for Alberta to leave either. I'm just speaking to the very point that, Mani, you were talking about earlier, about creating the investment climate. And I think it's pretty obvious, bringing back notions of lowering the bar, making it easier for people to have a referendum that could lead to eventual separation, and the Premier not really saying this is not our interest, but instead actually threatening it with lists of demands. I just hope that there's a higher calling amongst all of us.
This clip captures a crucial discussion about Alberta autonomy and the growing tensions within Confederation. When the panelist notes that Premier Smith has introduced legislation that lowers the bar for when a referendum can be held and that she wouldn't want to prescribe what it be used for, We're seeing a strategic ambiguity that gives Alberta powerful leverage in negotiations with Ottawa. The mention that Premier Moe in Saskatchewan said he would not stand in the way of a vote to separate further reinforces how Western provinces are collectively flexing their autonomy muscles. This coordinated approach suggests a genuine power shift in Canadian federalism, with resource-rich provinces no longer willing to be dictated to by Ottawa. What's particularly effective is how this clip frames Alberta's position not as simple obstructionism, but as a response to legitimate feelings of alienation.
It's a big country. There's a lot of different interests. If you go east to west, north to south, that's fine. But we just had a vote. Let's give the government a shot. Let's see if they can work together with other parties, work together with the provinces. We have a real threat that actually talks about
This validation of Alberta's grievances is crucial as it shifts the conversation from whether separation threats are appropriate to why they've become necessary. His statement that Alberta makes a major contribution to Confederation, and what do they get for that? They get ignored by the Liberal government for the last 10 years, cuts to the heart of Western alienation. By framing the issue as one of disrespect rather than merely policy disagreements, he elevates the moral standing of Alberta's position. The reference to Jonathan Wilkinson and Stephen Gilbill running down the industry, finding ways to keep oil and gas in the ground, effectively portrays federal ministers as actively hostile to Alberta's economic interests. This characterization of deliberate sabotage rather than good faith policy differences amplifies the justification for autonomy measures. When he expresses bemusement at the idea that people would feel alienated, he's highlighting the disconnect between Ottawa's actions and their apparent surprise at Western Canada's response.
Instead of it's up to Mark Carney. He can address this right now.
I 30 seconds left. It's all yours, Christy.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, as a British Columbian, I think it's going to be hard for Alberta to hit tidewater if they do actually separate. I mean, let's state the obvious here. But I do think there was some form of a referendum that just happened. It's called a general election. And Albertans made their voice heard very, clearly. They voted almost exclusively for the Conservative Party. Okay, we understand. So I think the issue for Canada now is for Mark Carney to figure out, with some significant numbers of New Democrats in his caucus, how he's going to make sure we rebuild our reputation with overseas, with investors, and how we actually find our way to building more pipelines, more infrastructure, so that Alberta's contribution to the country won't just be recognized, but it will be maximized, and it will do things like save our healthcare system and our education system and all those social programs that are so important to everybody.
Christy Clark, also a bonehead.
Here we see the panelists deliver a devastating assessment of Smith's political strategy, explaining that she's essentially providing a bit of a relief valve for Albertans' legitimate frustrations. His interruption to call out the other panelists who's shaking his head as a bonehead adds a raw authenticity to the defense of Smith's approach. The panelist brilliantly frames Smith's referendum legislation as a democratic pressure tactic, rather than a genuine separatist threat, by describing it as a way for Albertans to demonstrate that they have support for this, or to go back to what they're doing and find another way to show their dismay. He's portraying Smith as a responsible leader, giving voice to legitimate frustrations while maintaining multiple options. What's particularly effective is how this argument turns accusations of irresponsibility back on the federal government. The implication is clear. If Smith is being irresponsible by allowing democratic expression of alienation, how much more irresponsible is the federal government for creating the conditions that led to this alienation in the first place?
Monty, I was just getting some details on caucus, and the first part of it will involve basically a vote on whether or not to use the Reform Act. If they vote in favor of it, that means that they then are able to trigger sort of like an internal leadership review. My sense is that there isn't a whole lot of interest among MPs to do that. I'm wondering what your sense is.
Well, I've, canvassed a number of people, and I don't get a sense that people are anxious to remove Pierre. They probably feel he made some mistakes. He probably owes the caucus a bit of an explanation, but he also did some things that were very good. He's built the party up. He's really, reached out to all kinds of new people and achieved some historic numbers. So he's really got a good case to make as well as to why to stay. But of course, ultimately, he's got to find a seat in order to really be effective as the leader of the opposition.
How do you think the fact that he doesn't have a seat, Christy, complicates the entire conversation about his future as leader of the party? Or does
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is he looks like a loser.
This clip is powerful because it exposes the hypocrisy of the Liberal panelist who criticizes Smith for threatening separation, while ignoring the federal policies that created Western alienation. When he says, yes, there's frustrations, no kidding. The Liberals brought in Bill C-69, No Pipelines Act. How are we supposed to have prosperity when we can't have pipelines? He's directly connecting federal policy to economic harm. The statement that every developed nation on earth has oil and gas effectively challenges the underlying premise of Canada's environmental policy by calling climate-focused politicians delusional buffoons who think Mark Carney's net zero agenda is going to make everyone prosperous. He's stripping away the moral pretensions of climate policy to expose what he sees as economic harm.
He lost track of what the actual issues were in the election. If the issues were not Justin Trudeau, it was Donald Trump. He did, he lost his own seat. He ended up, I think, kind of with a terrible campaign message. He just couldn't get himself over the top. Even though, as Monty said, he got more votes and did better than most other previous Conservative government leaders before him. So I think it's going to be I think for the moment, the caucus is going to rally, because that's what they need to do in the face of, this what I'm sure is a devastating loss for most Conservatives. On the other hand, though, I think it's just, it's only a couple of years probably until the Conservatives or the NDP decide that they want to force an election. And in that case, you will start to see the knives come out for Pierre Poilievre in a very, very big way. Jason Kenney, Premier Ford, lots of people out there who are very competent, very able, proven winners who would probably be interested in having that job. And I don't think anybody is going to say, you know what, you lost the last election, but you can win the next one, when there are lots of ambitious people out there who think that they can.
Former BC Premier Christy Clark delivers what the host calls a smug comment, that it's going to be hard for Alberta to hit Tidewater if they do actually separate, which is immediately rebutted with the observation that Alberta doesn't need to get oil to Tidewater. It just needs to get it to America. If Alberta separates, it'll probably join America, because that's the smart thing to do. This exchange brilliantly exposes the disconnection between Eastern Canadian political elites and Alberta's actual options. Clark's attempt to use access to Pacific ports as leverage ignores Alberta's most natural economic partnership, the United States. By pointing out this obvious alternative, the host undermines the entire premise of Clark's argument that Alberta would suffer economically from separation. The blunt statement that Mark Carney already said he's not going to get rid of Bill C-69, so our country is screwed for the next 4 years, further reinforces the case for separation by suggesting there's no hope for federal policy change.
Message to caucus, what would you anticipate from his message to caucus, Nathan, on Tuesday? Because there's this sort of interesting thing to reconcile, which is he did lose his seat. We haven't heard from him since that outcome. We heard from him, obviously, on election night. But at the same time, you didn't win the election, but you've got the biggest share of the popular vote that you've had literally since the 80s when Brian Mulroney was winning these massive Conservative governments. Like, how do you square those things for caucus or for Canadians?
Well, how does so much winning look like losing? Right? All of those things you said are true. What Monty said was absolutely correct, that the party improved, but it's against what do you measure success by. And at Christmas, success was government or bust, right? It's kind of like a team in the playoffs that almost makes it. And then the next run, this time I'm in Toronto right now, Vashi, so excuse me if I'm going to use any Leaf metaphors right now. But the idea is that the goal was government. That goal was not achieved. And the seat loss, like we all know now, on election night, we wondered, why is Pierre talking so early in the night? He suddenly is out on stage, he's doing his speech, and we're together. And they knew they were losing his seat and didn't want that result to be in front of everyone and then have to make that speech to the nation. What does he need to say to caucus? I don't know. I get the sense in talking to some Conservative MPs that the loyalty is still high. There aren't a lot of quote unquote star candidates that Mr. Poilievre recruited in the last election. That's actually a benefit right now. So you don't have all these bruised egos that were getting ready for their various cabinet positions and are now ticked off. The people Christy mentioned, they're waiting in the wings, but they're not out chirping. They're not out in public. Well, with a few exceptions, taking on Pierre right now. I don't think they're clamoring for his job. So I think he's probably fine with caucus. Give it a few months. And if the polling's off, if they're down significantly, that's when things start to get a little bit more rumbly as to the question of, is he the right guy for next? He was great at opposition. Then he applied and auditioned for the prime minister job and didn't really pivot into that feeling for a lot of Canadians that this guy could handle the top job. He was a good attack dog, but is he a good leader in terms of the country's desires?
This clip provides critical context on Pierre Poilievre's leadership situation within the Conservative Party. The discussion of whether MPs might trigger an internal leadership review and the panelists' assessment that people are not anxious to remove Pierre helps viewers understand the internal party dynamics following the election loss. The balanced observation that Poilievre probably made some mistakes but also did some things that were very good presents a nuanced view of his leadership. Noting that he's built the party up and reached out to all kinds of new people and achieved some historic numbers provides important context that counters the simplistic Poilievre failed narrative pushed by his opponents. The acknowledgement that he's got a good case to make as well as to why to stay indicates that despite the election disappointment, Poilievre's position remains relatively strong. However, the observation that ultimately he's got to find a seat in order to really be effective as the leader of the opposition highlights a practical challenge he faces.
Why do you think they ultimately fell short?
Well, there are a few reasons. On the one hand, I think Pierre had a message that did resonate with a chunk of the population. There were clearly two different sort of sets of people or sets of concerns that drove the election outcome. One was affordability, housing, this kind of thing. The other was the narrative around the need to defend.
This segment showcases former BC Premier Christy Clark's hypocritical attack on Poilievre, which is immediately and devastatingly countered when Clark says Poilievre looks like a loser for not getting his own seat. The host immediately points out that she experienced the same situation when she lost your seat in a huge upset to David Abey. This brilliant fact check exposes Clark's hypocrisy and undermines her entire critique. Her statement that he lost track of what the actual issues were in the election. The issues were not Justin Trudeau. It was Donald Trump presents a self-serving liberal interpretation of the election, which the host implicitly challenges.
In that instance, we didn't pivot fast enough. We didn't make a strong enough case that we could do that. And it fell in the minds of many Canadians to Mark Carney to be that person. So I think we need to bear that in mind going into a new government. I think there's going to be a period of time where the expectation is that parties work together as much as possible to strengthen Canada so that it can withstand the tariff threat and any threats of annexation from Donald Trump. That may mean doing some things that we don't normally see in Parliament, like trying to work together on pieces of legislation or on initiatives. And I think, Canada's expecting some happy warriors right now on all sides. So it may be a different thing that we haven't seen in a very long time in Canada. And I would encourage Pierre Poilievre and my Conservative colleagues to keep that in mind because I think it will be important at some point down the road when we're asked whether or not we...
Clark continues her attack on Poilievre with the prediction that in that case, you will start to see the knives come out for Pierre Poilievre in a very, very big way. Her mention of potential replacements like Jason Kenney, Premier Ford, lots of people out there who are very competent, very able, proven winners suggests she's actively encouraging a leadership challenge. The host's characterization of Clark as a conniving, slippery snake, followed by the accusation that Doug Ford had a meeting with the Liberals, got them on board to try to help him get in and Poilievre out, presents a damning counter-narrative of coordination between supposed Conservatives and Liberals to undermine Poilievre.
Christy, you sat for a long time in the legislature. You know better than, and all three of you would know better than me. Do you think that this moment will lead to something like that, even though it may be against natural instincts in a political arena?
Well, I think it should. I mean, I've won some and I've lost some, both the same number, by the way, over the years. These are very difficult times for the leader. I have to say my heart goes out to him in some ways. But I do think, Poilievre has not shown the ability to really kind of soften up and take a different tack. This election may be an important...
This powerful clip focuses on the political dynamic between Poilievre and his caucus. The host asks what message Poilievre might deliver to his MPs, while the panelist notes the intriguing paradox. How does so much winning look like losing? This framing brilliantly captures the Conservative dilemma. They increased their vote share dramatically, but still lost the election. The observation that the party improved, But what do you measure success by cuts to the heart of the political challenge. By acknowledging that success was government or bust, the panelist accurately identifies the high expectations Poilievre set, which makes the election result feel like a disappointment despite objective improvements in Conservative performance.
You're right, Vashi. That is exactly what needs to happen, what Monty Solberg talked about. We need to find some space to try and come together over the most important issues. I'm not naive. I don't think they're not all going to still be fighting and jostling, but the really key things, we need to be united as a country. And a lot of eyes are going to be on Pierre Poilievre to see if he can do that. If he can, I mean, who knows? He might survive to fight another day. I think if he fails to do that, it'll be terrible for Canada. And I think it will probably be his death warrant as leader.
Well, Carney needs to do it too. I would just say that.
Yeah.
I mean, Carney needs to reach out to Conservatives, certainly in Western Canada. I know we're getting to that. She's sorry to get ahead of it.
That's our whole next segment, I promise. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really is critical that he shows that good faith that we didn't see from the Trudeau government on resource development and that sort of thing, because it can't be a one-way street.
Nathan, sorry, you got to jump in too.
My question, and Monty's not wrong. Mr. Carney is different than Mr. Trudeau. He's not, as he told us 4,500 times in the election, he's not a politician. The House itself, the way Parliament has been conducting itself over the last few years, particularly as it ramped up towards the election, was just unworkable. Who's to blame for it? Well, there's lots of blame to go around. Ironically, not so much towards the NDP, who were trying to get things done, but then suffered in the election for maybe that reason or other reasons. I just don't know if Pierre's got the gear, right? Does he have that phase or ability to be graceful in defeat and magnanimous and understand this larger question that you've raised and that your other guests have spoken to, that we're facing this crisis right now, bickering and sniping. It just got so awful, Vashi. You saw it. It was deeply personal, non-functional. This is not the time for that. Does Pierre have that ability to rise to what's being called upon all members of Parliament right now? We'll see. I guess I'm a little skeptical because I've known him a long time and he's really good at the attack. Let's see if he's good at this other thing, and that might stand him in good stead and might keep him in his job right now if he wants to go for the top job in an election from now.
Let me just follow up very quickly with just a 30-second question, and maybe, Monty, you can answer this. Do you think there's a possibility of caucus pressuring him for a move in that way? Because I interviewed a couple of MPs, for example, this week on my radio program, who actually brought that up proactively, the idea that on an issue-by-issue basis, for example, on energy, if that comes up, like, that they would need to project a different image to Canadians in this moment. Like, can MPs lead him there?
Well, first of all, nobody is ready for the job of Prime Minister. You have to grow into it. It demands things of you that you don't expect before you get that job. So to be successful, MPs are equal partners in the success of the Conservative Party of Canada, and they have a right to demand from their leader that he or she grows in a particular way to ensure that they win elections and command the confidence of Canadians. So I think it's only right for MPs to call out their leaders, preferably behind closed doors, so they can have a fulsome discussion, not in front of the...
I mean, Corey Tanecki, Doug Ford's campaign manager, should have done. He should have privately said, hey, you guys need to pivot on Trump or whatever, not blasted out with a bunch of F-bombs on some podcast show.
The national media, like we often do. But, really, that is something that tells me about whether or not a leader has the humility to really deserve.
The panelist delivers a crucial analysis of why the Conservatives fell short, noting there were clearly two different sort of sets of people or sets of concerns that drove the election outcome. One was affordability, housing, this kind of thing. The other was the narrative around the need to defend Canada against Donald Trump. The host's blunt interpretation that anyone under 55 who wants to be able to afford life voted for the Conservatives, while anyone over 55 has their house paid off, doesn't have to worry about finance, was given the luxury of fearing Donald Trump, brilliantly distills the election into a generational divide between economic concerns and Trump anxiety.